You know that one neighbor who thinks they run the whole neighborhood? The kind who measures your grass with a ruler, leaves passive-aggressive notes, and somehow believes they're the supreme overlord of the HOA, even when they have no real authority. Yeah, meet Karen. When she saw us camping in our own backyard, she lost her mind. Suddenly, she was making up fake rules, threatening fines, and patrolling like a one-woman neighborhood police force. But here's the thing, we own the land. The HOA had zero say in what we did. So when Karen pushed too far, we decided to push back. What followed was a glorious battle of petty revenge, neighborhood drama, and the ultimate karma that left Karen powerless, exposed, and finally silenced. Strap in, because this is the story of how HOA Karen learned the hard way that sometimes the rules apply to everyone. It all started on a quiet, peaceful evening in our little neighborhood. The kind of place where people waved at each other from their driveways, kids rode bikes without a care, and weekend barbecues filled the air with the smell of grilled perfection. We had just moved onto a nice piece of property that, thankfully, we owned outright. No mortgage, no landlord, just our slice of land to enjoy however we pleased. Enter Karen. You see, every neighborhood has one. The self-appointed guardian of property values, the enforcer of imaginary rules, and the HOA's self-proclaimed queen. Karen didn't have an actual title, but she carried herself like a four-star general in the war against fun. Her uniform? A pastel cardigan, an aggressive bob cut, and a clipboard she wielded like a weapon. We'd already had a few small run-ins. The first was about the color of our front door. She insisted it was too vibrant and clashed with the harmony of the neighborhood. It was beige. The second was when she left a handwritten warning about our lawn being 0.02 inches too high. I wish I were kidding. But the real war began the day we decided to camp in our own backyard. It was supposed to be a fun, simple night. We set up a tent, lit a small fire in our fire pit, and got ready to roast marshmallows under the stars. But just as the first marshmallow hit the flame, we heard it, the sharp, unmistakable clap, clap, clap of Karen's orthopedic sandals marching toward us. "Excuse me," she barked, hands on her hips, her infamous clipboard clutched tight. "What do you think you're doing?" I blinked, looking around. Camping," she gasped, as if I had just admitted to running a secret underground crime ring. "You can't do that. It's against HOA policy." Now, here's the thing. Our property wasn't even part of the HOA. It never had been. And even if it was, I was pretty sure camping on private land wasn't a criminal offense. I raised an eyebrow. "Oh, which rule exactly?" Karen hesitated for a fraction of a second before snapping her clipboard open, flipping through pages like she was about to recite the Constitution. Finally, she landed on something. Section 9.2. No permanent structures in the yard. I looked at our tent. "It's a tent, Karen. It's not permanent." "Well, it looks permanent," she shot back. That's when I realized Karen didn't actually know the rules. She just made things up as she went along, expecting everyone to fall in line. I wasn't about to play that game. "Well, Karen," I said with my best customer service voice, "unless you can point to an actual real rule that says I can't have a tent on my own land, I think I'll stay right here and enjoy my s'mores." Her face turned the shade of an overripe tomato. "I'll be reporting this to the HOA board," she declared, spinning on her heel. "You'll be hearing from us soon." And with that, she stormed off into the night, grumbling about property values and respectable neighborhoods. The battle had begun, but Karen had no idea who she was dealing with. The next morning, I found a note taped to my front door. Not just any note. This was a Karen special, written in aggressive cursive with unnecessary underlines for emphasis. "You are in direct violation of HOA policies regarding improper land use. Immediate removal of unauthorized structures, i.e. your tent, is required, or further action will be taken." I chuckled. Further action? What was she going to do, call the camping police? Of course, I wasn't about to let this slide. Instead of responding, I took the note, folded it neatly, and placed it right back on her doorstep with a little post-it. "Not in the HOA." Nice try, though. For most people, that would have been the end of it. But Karen? Oh no, this was just the beginning. By the afternoon, she was back, clipboard in one hand, phone in the other, acting as if she were about to conduct a full-blown home inspection. I watched from the porch as she walked. Marched, right up to the edge of my property line, squinting at my tent as if it personally offended her. "Karen," I greeted, taking a sip of my coffee. "Back so soon?" She ignored me, flipping furiously through her clipboard before stabbing a finger at a random page. This is an eyesore. It disrupts the uniformity of the neighborhood. I glanced at my backyard. The tent was modest, nothing flashy, just a simple green dome. It's literally a tent, Karen. Not a carnival ride. She huffed, dramatically adjusting her reading glasses. I've spoken with several concerned neighbors about this issue, and we all agree it needs to come down immediately. I smirked. Several neighbors, huh? Like who? There was a pause. A brief flicker of hesitation in her overly confident expression. She hadn't actually spoken to anyone, because no one cared. That's not important, she snapped. What is important is that you comply with HOA regulations. I sighed. For the last time, Karen, we're not in the HOA. You don't have any authority here. She gasped, as if I had just insulted her personally. Well, that's just ridiculous. Everyone should be in the HOA. It's what keeps neighborhoods civilized. Yeah, I'm good, I said, turning to walk back inside. Enjoy your clipboard. But she wasn't done. The next day, I woke up to find another note, this one taped directly onto my tent. Final warning. Failure to comply will result in escalated action. Escalated action? What was she going to do? Write an extra strongly worded letter. I crumpled the note and tossed it. That night, I made sure to keep the tent up just a little longer, knowing full well it would drive her insane. And sure enough, I caught her measuring my grass with a ruler the next morning. This was turning into a full-fledged war that I decided it was time to have a little fun. Karen wanted to play HOA enforcer? Fine. Let's see how she liked a taste of her own medicine. The first step was keeping my cool. If there was one thing I knew about people like Karen, it was that they thrived on drama. She wanted me to lose my temper, to cave under her pressure, to beg for forgiveness over my supposed rule-breaking. Yeah, that wasn't going to happen. Instead, I did what any sane, rational person would do. I made the situation more annoying for her. The next evening, I invited a few friends over for a proper backyard camping experience. We set up an extra tent, built a little fire in the pit, and enjoyed the sweet, delicious sound of laughter and good times, aka Karen's worst nightmare. Sure enough, just as we were about to start making s'mores, there she was. A shadowy figure appeared at the edge of my yard, standing with the poise of a woman who had dedicated her life to micromanaging other people's happiness. Clipboard in hand, she cleared her throat, loudly. I turned to my friend. Oh no, guys, it's the law. Everybody looks serious. Karen stepped forward, arms crossed. This has gone too far. I blinked. Camping. This is unacceptable behavior for this neighborhood, she huffed. We are not, she flailed a hand in the air. Barbarians. I stifled a laugh. Karen, we're literally roasting marshmallows. She ignored me, flipping open her clipboard. You have now repeatedly ignored my notices regarding the removal of these unsanctioned structures. I raised an eyebrow. You mean the tents? Yes, and I warned you that there would be consequences. She adjusted her glasses and dramatically cleared her throat. As of now, you are being issued a formal complaint to the HOA board. I blinked. The same HOA board that I'm not a part of? She faltered for half a second, but recovered quickly. Well, they can still take action against disruptions to the community. My friend whispered, should we be scared? I grinned. Oh, definitely. Next thing you know, she's going to start measuring the air quality. Karen's nostrils flared. You think this is funny? I shrugged. A little bit, yeah. She took a deep breath, clearly trying to remain calm, but her patience was wearing thin. Fine. If you won't listen to me, then maybe you'll listen when you start receiving fines. That made me laugh out loud. Karen, you can't fine me. The HOA has zero jurisdiction over my property. That's when she delivered the most Karen response of all time. We'll see about that. And with that, she spun around and stomped off into the night like a villain exiting stage left. But I knew Karen wasn't done. This was just the warm-up. The real show was about to begin. The next morning, I walked outside to grab the mail, half expecting another one of Karen's passive-aggressive notes to be waiting for me. Instead, I found something even better. A group of my neighbors whispering in hushed tones near my driveway. Now, in most cases, neighborhood gossip was harmless. People chatted about new neighbors, debated whose lawn was the greenest, and occasionally spread wild rumors about Mr. Thompson's mysterious Amazon packages. But this was something special. As soon as they saw me, Tom from next door, an older guy who had lived in the neighborhood long before Karen moved in, grinned. Well, looks like somebody made the list. I raised an eyebrow. The list? Oh yeah, Tom chuckled. Karen's neighborhood offenders list. I stared at him. You're kidding. He smirked. Wish I was. She's been going around telling people you're actively threatening the values of the community with your noncompliance. He did exaggerated air quotes around noncompliance. I laughed. For camping? On my own land. Another neighbor, Lisa, rolled her eyes. Yep. Apparently, your tent is a serious violation of the Residential Aesthetic Code. I smirked. Oh, you mean the code that doesn't actually exist? Bingo. I couldn't believe it. Karen wasn't just annoyed. She was waging a full-blown propaganda campaign against me. But here's where things got interesting. Not everyone was buying into her nonsense. Sure, a couple of the more Karen-adjacent neighbors nodded along to her theatrics, but the majority? They were either laughing about it or secretly rooting for me. Last week, Tom whispered conspiratorially, she tried to find me for my cat. I choked on my coffee. Your cat? Lisa nodded. Oh, it was ridiculous. She claimed the cat was trespassing because he likes to sit on other people's porches. Tom shook his head. She actually took a photo of him sitting on my neighbor's welcome mat as evidence. Lisa snorted. The cat doesn't even belong to him. He's just a roaming cat that everyone feeds. We all burst into laughter, but the more we talked, the more I realized just how deep Karen's reign of terror ran. She had complained about a retired couple's flower beds being too wild. She had once measured someone's mailbox height and tried to report it. She had written up a single mom because her kids' chalk drawings on the sidewalk were disrupting the uniformity of the neighborhood. It was absurd. And now, I was her latest obsession. Lisa leaned in, lowering her voice. Word on the street is, she's planning to bring this up at the next HOA meeting. I smirked. Oh good. I've been meaning to attend one of those. Tom laughed. Oh, this is going to be fun. And just like that, I realized something very important. I wasn't just dealing with Karen anymore. This was an opportunity. Because if she wanted a fight, I had an entire neighborhood of allies ready to watch her fall. The HOA meeting was set for Thursday evening, and I had never been more excited for a boring community gathering in my life. By the time I arrived, the room was already buzzing. A few neighbors gave me knowing smirks, and Tom gave me an exaggerated thumbs up from his seat in the back. Lisa had even brought popcorn. And there, at the front of the room, was Karen, clipboard in hand, back ramrod straight. The sheer look of satisfaction on her face told me she fully expected to win tonight. The HOA president, Mr. Reynolds, an older gentleman who had clearly been dealing with Karen's nonsense for years, sighed as he banged his gavel. All right, let's get this started. First on the agenda, he adjusted his glasses. Karen has filed a formal complaint regarding unauthorized camping? Karen practically leaped out of her seat. Yes. Thank you. As I have repeatedly stated, there is an unauthorized structure being used in clear violation of neighborhood standards, and it is disrupting the harmony of our community. Mr. Reynolds looked exhausted already. Karen, are you referring to the tent? Yes, she said, hands on her hips. And I have documented proof that it has been up for multiple days, despite my written warnings. I leaned back in my chair. On my own land. Karen's head snapped toward me. Regardless, it is still a violation. I held up my hand. I'm sorry, which rule exactly? She blinked. Excuse me? I gestured around. You've been claiming this whole time that I'm breaking the rules. So I'd love for you to point out the specific HOA regulation that forbids camping on non-HOA property. Silence. Karen's mouth opened and closed like a fish. Well, she stammered, it's common sense that we should all follow unified neighborhood standards. Mr. Reynolds cut her off with a sigh. Karen, there is no such rule. You could have heard a pin drop. Lisa actually choked on a piece of popcorn. Karen's face turned a deep shade of red. But, it should be a rule. It's setting a bad precedent. What if other people start putting up tents? What if someone builds an entire campsite? What if? Mr. Reynolds held up a hand. Karen, the HOA does not have authority over non-member properties. And even if we did, a temporary tent does not violate any existing rules. Karen gasped. You mean you're just going to let this slide? You're just going to let him ruin the neighborhood? Karen, he interrupted, rubbing his temples, for the last time, it's not against the rules. This is not a discussion. Moving on. The room erupted in murmurs. Tom audibly whispered, Oh, that's gotta hurt. But Karen wasn't done. Oh no. She couldn't lose like this. Her eyes darted around wildly before she suddenly jabbed a finger in my direction. Fine. If I can't get him on that, then what about the unauthorized fire pit? A few people audibly groaned. Karen, I said slowly, I built that fire pit 3 years ago, and it's completely up to code. Well, I don't think it's safe. Mr. Reynolds sighed deeply. The fire pit was already approved at a previous meeting. Next topic. No, Karen shrieked, slamming her clipboard onto the table. I am tired of this blatant disregard for proper neighborhood conduct. First it's a tent, then a fire pit. What's next, an RV park? Someone from the back muttered. Sounds like a great idea. Karen whipped around, scandalized. You can't be serious. Mr. Reynolds pinched the bridge of his nose. Karen, please sit down. I will not sit down while this neighborhood descends into chaos, she cried dramatically. Mark my words, if we let this slide, we'll be dealing with tents everywhere. Trash. Noise. Decreasing property values. Tom leaned over to me. $5 says she brings up outsiders next. Karen threw up her hands. And then we'll have outsiders moving in and ruining everything. I held out my hand, and Tom wordlessly handed me a $5 bill. The murmuring in the room shifted. People were getting really tired of Karen's antics. Even some of her usual supporters looked like they were regretting their life choices. And then the final nail in the coffin. A woman I didn't recognize, a newer neighbor, raised her hand. I'm sorry, but why does Karen get to decide what's proper for the neighborhood? Who put her in charge? Karen spun toward her. Excuse me? I am an active member of this community. I uphold the standards. The woman cut her off. Yeah, but nobody actually voted for you to do that. The room went dead silent. Karen's eyes widened in horror. The woman continued. In fact, if you're going to be making all these complaints, shouldn't we have a vote on whether you should even be making decisions for the neighborhood? Lisa stood up and clapped. And just like that, the tides officially turned. People started murmuring in agreement. I mean, yeah, she's always causing problems. Didn't she report my kid's lemonade stand? Honestly, I'm tired of the constant complaints. I still can't believe she tried to find a cat. Karen panicked. You can't be serious. You need me. This neighborhood needs structure. Mr. Reynolds looked way too pleased as he leaned forward. Well, Karen, since we're discussing neighborhood matters, maybe it's time we put your role as unofficial enforcer to a vote. Karen went completely pale. Someone shouted, all in favor of removing Karen's authority over anything? A sea of hands shot up. Even Mr. Reynolds raised his. Karen gasped in betrayal. You traitors. Tom gave me a smug nod. You love to see it. And just like that, Karen was officially powerless. Karen sat there in stunned silence, her jaw slack, her entire worldview crumbling like a stale cookie. For the first time in her life, she had no authority. No power. No clipboard-backed tyranny. Just a room full of neighbors who had finally had enough of her nonsense. Mr. Reynolds tapped his gavel. Well, that settles it. Karen, you are no longer permitted to file complaints on behalf of the HOA unless you hold an official board position, which, for the record, you do not. Lisa let out a loud whoop. Tom muttered under his breath. I haven't been this happy since I got my senior discount at Home Depot. Karen, however, was not about to accept her downfall gracefully. You can't do this, she sputtered. I have been the backbone of this community. Without me, this neighborhood will be significantly quieter, I finished for her. The room erupted into laughter. Karen's face turned so red I thought she might actually explode. She grabbed her clipboard, hugged it to her chest like a lifeline, and stormed out of the meeting without another word. I leaned back in my chair. Well, that was fun. Lisa grinned. Not as fun as this. She held up her phone, showing me the recording she had made of the entire event. I raised an eyebrow. Oh, you're good. Better than good, she smirked. I already sent it to the HOA email list. By the time I got home that night, Karen's defeat had spread like wildfire. Neighbors were celebrating. People were outside chatting, cracking jokes, and a few even stopped by my yard to offer congratulations. The best part? A few families had set up their own backyard tents in solidarity. Tom walked over, grinning. Seems like you started a movement. I looked around, admiring the sudden influx of unauthorized camping. Yep, I said, and I'd like to dedicate this moment to Karen, wherever she is, who made all of this possible. Tom chuckled. Speaking of which, have you seen her house? I frowned. What about it? He pointed across the street. I turned and, oh, it was beautiful. Karen, in all her obsessive, rule-enforcing glory, had violated her own HOA regulations. Her holiday decorations were still up. Now, normal people wouldn't care. But Karen had personally fined people for leaving up decorations past the deadline. Lisa appeared next to me, grinning. You know what this means? I nodded. It's time to file a complaint. By morning, Karen had a lovely, official HOA violation notice taped to her front door. By noon, she was fined. By the end of the week, she had taken down her decorations and wasn't speaking to anyone. The best part? The neighborhood was finally peaceful. No more clipboard patrols. No more Karen complaints. No more surprise violations. And as I sat in my backyard, enjoying a quiet evening by the fire pit, I smiled to myself. Karen had finally learned that sometimes the rules apply to everyone. Life in the neighborhood improved drastically after Karen's downfall. It was as if someone had lifted a years-long storm cloud, and for the first time in ages, people could just exist without fear of being hit with a surprise HOA complaint. The best part? People actually started enjoying their homes again. Tom kept his crookedly parked car just to spite Karen. Lisa threw a Karen-free celebration barbecue in her backyard, complete with decorations that would have sent Karen into a rage spiral. And the best moment of all? One evening, I saw a group of kids drawing on the sidewalk with chalk, the same thing Karen had once tried to ban. Their colorful doodles stretched across multiple houses, creating a massive rainbow of hopscotch squares, smiley faces, and random squiggles. I smiled to myself. She would have hated this. As for Karen, well, she wasn't completely gone, but she wasn't Karen anymore. After the HOA meeting disaster, she laid low for a while. No more patrols. No more clipboard. No more passive-aggressive notes left on people's doors. It was as if she had finally realized that her iron grip on the neighborhood had been permanently broken. Oh, sure, she still scowled at me whenever we crossed paths. And I'm pretty sure she cringed internally every time she saw one of my weekend camping setups. But she no longer had the power to do anything about it. And honestly, that was good enough for me. One day, Tom came over while I was setting up my fire pit. So, he asked, think she's going to try another power grab? I smirked. Nah, she learned her lesson. He chuckled. Still, you never know. People like her, they don't give up easily. I nodded. True, but we're ready for her now. The sun dipped below the horizon, casting a warm glow over the neighborhood. And as I sat there, roasting marshmallows over my fire pit on my land, surrounded by neighbors who had finally reclaimed their peace, I realized something. We had won. And no clipboard in the world could change that. What's the most ridiculous HOA rule you've ever heard of? If you were in my shoes, how would you have handled Karen? Do you think HOAs help communities, or are they just a power trip for control freaks? What's the pettiest way you've ever gotten revenge on an annoying neighbor? Should I set up even more tents just to mess with her? Face with tears of joy.